Hi, welcome to SBR Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. It's mid-July, and we are previewing all the college football conferences. Right now, we're talking with Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. We're looking at the ACC. Right now, we're going to take a look at the ACC Coastal Division. Joe Duffy, you figured that you're going to have a profitable college football season this year?
Fantastic. We really don't change much year for year. As the old saying goes, why fix it when it's not broken? But I can tell you, I've acquired more incredible systems this offseason than any other previous offseason, so we'll be enhanced with even more computer systems.
That sounds great, Joe. Well, the ACC Coastal, a pretty interesting division, a lot of interesting teams. They seem overall to have a lot more upsides in general than the teams in the Atlantic Division. The two favorites, the co-favorites are Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, both at plus 195. Which of those teams do you think might be a better bet this upcoming year, might be more likely to be undervalued as opposed to overvalued?
Truthfully, I think that this could be a great bounce back year for Virginia Tech. They have a ton of talent back on offense. Michael Brewer is back, but the downside is he's got to cut down on those mistakes, and that is a big if. If he can cut down on those mistakes, very talented on offense. He's got some good receivers, Isaiah Ford, Cam Phillips. These are two guys that combined for 96 receptions. Bucky Rogers, a tremendous tight end, caught 45 balls. Virginia Tech, they could finally beam, so to speak, their way back to the top. But, Georgia Tech, a pretty darn good team as well with Justin Thomas, and they have 4 offensive linemen. So, yeah, the implication of your question, it should definitely be a battle of the Techs in the Coastal Division.
Yeah, the problem with Virginia Tech, I mean, on paper, there's a lot to recommend them, right? Their defense is going to be one of the best in college football, probably the best in the ACC, and some positives on offense as well. It's just that, these past 3 years, we know that they've underwhelmed, underachieved, and it's not like they're coming into this year with low expectations. Like I said, their expectations are as high as Georgia Tech, and it just feels like even if Virginia Tech does improve a little bit, it just makes me feel uncomfortable inside myself betting on a team that's been so overvalued in recent years.
But that's one of those things. It's one of those things I warn people against. I know a lot of people are out there say something to the effect of Virginia Tech, they burned me so many times over the years. I can't bet on them. That's one of those things you got to get out of your head. I know people say all the time, don't bet with your heart. That's true. But I like to say a more important rule is don't bet with a broken heart. I know Virginia Tech has broken some hearts the past few years, but this is a new Virginia Tech team. We know that Frank Beamer's got a long, impressive resume. Doesn't have an impressive resume the last 5 years or so, but he does have the talent to get back to top this year.
All right, then what about overs with Georgia Tech? Defense is always a liability year in, year out with Georgia Tech because they just don't quite recruit the athletes that they need to have an excellent top-flight defense. On offense, though, they have a great system, and this guy Thomas is really last year really stepped up. In 2013, there were some issues, but on offense for Georgia Tech, but the system was really working last year, and it looks like it's going to work again this year. If Georgia Tech isn't necessarily a good bet on their spreads, if they're just 50-50 ATS, do you think they might be a good bet on their overs?
Yeah, they certainly have to improve on that defense. That defense gave up so many yards. They gave up a lot of yards per play. Also, in addition to what you said, Georgia Tech has 4 offensive linemen back, and they have quite a few guys back on their 2 deep. Now, a lot of coaches will tell you that the way the blocking schemes are on an option offense, it's more important to have experienced guys because of the blocking schemes on the offensive line than there is any other type of offense. But I agree with you. Georgia Tech, they've consistently had a pretty bad defense. They have nowhere to go really but up. But do they have enormous talent? No, they have a pretty good starting unit, but very little depth. So Tech could be one of those teams that if they have an under in the first half of a game, you might want to start betting the over in the second half because I think their defense could wear down. And also, with a lot of their games being played in the South and the heat, their defense could go downward as the year goes on.
Okay, and then let's get your read on Pittsburgh, maybe the most interesting team in all of the ACC. The expectations aren't that high. They're the fifth-ranked team in the ACC Coastal Division at plus 1,000. Their season win total is just 6 at minus 120, but they have 2 of the most dynamic offensive players in football, of course, with James Conner and Boyd, and their defense has been a liability, but Coach Narduzzi, was Michigan State's defensive coordinator. He did a good job there, so it's always possible to, would not be a surprise to see a big improvement on defense from Pittsburgh. So with so many real positive sides and such low expectations, you think Pittsburgh might be a team that will be a good bet against the spread this year?
Without question, they can run the ball. James Conner's a tremendous running back. He ran for 26 touchdowns. Last year, they got a wide receiver, Tyler Boyd, with 78 receptions. Of course, the quarterback, Chad Wojtek, is going to be the big X factor. Can he get the ball to his playmakers?
Yeah.
They do have a very young team, 81 underclassmen. What that means is consistently inconsistent. I think they're going to look spectacular one week, terrible the next week. And remember, these young teams tend to look much better at home than they are on the road. So if Pittsburgh, they look great at home one week and they hit the road, pretty good chance I'm going to say bet against them. If they look awful on the road one week and they're coming home, pretty good chance at the very least I'm going to have a check mark in the column to go with them.
Well, they're projected to have a worse season on these preseason futures odds than Miami. But to my eye, Miami looks like they have a lot more negatives. They lost a lot of talent this year. They have the big difference is that they have a marquee quarterback who's played well, whereas Pittsburgh has questions at quarterback. But Miami has sort of been like Virginia Tech. They've underwhelmed recently. They always have a lot of talent on their roster, but it doesn't translate into wins and often translates into ATS losses. This year's team is going to be very young. The win total is 6.5. The over is just plus 100. I'm thinking maybe Miami might be a team that might be due for some ATS losses. What do you think?
Well, Miami, more than just about any team in the country and certainly in the conference, did underachieve last year, but they do have a lot of talent back. Brad Kaya does have a year under his belt. There's no question having a stud quarterback. You can talk all about offensive line and defense that you want. When you've got a stud quarterback, that is a big difference maker. Kaya's got the ability to do that. They have depth at wide receiver.
Yes.
They have some promising young running backs. I think, I talked about Virginia Tech could be a bounce back year for for some of those traditional powers that have been down, Virginia Tech and Miami. I do think both of those teams could bounce back this year, but there's no question. And this is one of those motivating things, are they going to play for their coach, Al Golden? A lot of people think this is kind of a make or break year for them. But Miami does have the talent, and it starts with a strong-arm stud quarterback.
Okay, and then rounding out the ACC Coastal, Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia. Duke, of course, has been a team that has generally been a good bet in over the last 5 years or so. They have 12 returning starters, and North Carolina, Marquise Williams is very promising under quarterback. They have some some offensive weapons that are kind of eye-opening, especially at receiver. Yeah. Defense is going to have to get better, and then there's Virginia, rounding out the conference with terrible odds. Their win total is 4 minus 130 to the over. Do you have anything to say about Duke, North Carolina, or Virginia? Maybe overs with UNC? What do you think?
UNC does have 10 starters back on offense. I think at times people fall too in love with when they look at the height mismatches, but people who are in love with the height mismatches, UNC does have 3 good wide receivers who are 6'4" or bigger, and when they go against smaller secondaries, the mismatches will be there. Now, again, sometimes it helps to be very speedy and talented at defensive back. I do think that a lot of people make somewhat of a mistake over-analyzing that at times. Look, Gene Chizik, is he going to make a big difference as the defensive coordinator? We know he's kind of a one-hit wonder when he had Cam Newton as quarterback. Cam Newton's going to make anybody look like a great defensive coach. But Chizik's been around a long time, and he is considered to be a great defensive mind, a very good defensive mind. They've got nowhere to go but up on defense. But I think North Carolina's offense is going to be a lot better than people do think. They've got depth at running back and wide receiver, and they might be one of those teams that could be a better second half of a game team, not necessarily second half of the season, but second half of the game. People like to bet the first and second half lines. I think that North Carolina, because they have pretty rock solid depth, could cover a lot of second half lines, especially if they struggle in the first half. They've got some good depth on offense.
Joe Duffy's website is offshoreinsiders.com. Thanks, Joe.